Ways of Mankind, a program that shows how human beings live together in different times and places.
In every society, at every moment, a man has a certain position. It may be because of the work he does, or the amount of property he owns, or the color of his skin. It may vary from time to time. Your position as a father is different from your position as a son, and both are different from your positions as an uncle or as a brother. You may have one kind of position at your work, another in your family, and another down at the club where you're bowling champion. Each of these positions is called a status.
And different societies have different ways of placing a man on the ladder of status, higher or lower. For instance, among the Chukchi Indians of Siberia, if you can throw epileptic fits, it greatly improves your status. It makes you a magician and a curer.
In our society, some of the different jobs and ways of life that give a man status are listed in the old children's fortune-telling rhyme.
Tinker, tailor, soldier, sailor, rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief, doctor, lawyer, Indian chief.
All these things have different status in our society, and from each particular status, particular behavior is expected. We expect the doctor to behave differently from the poor man, and we expect the lawyer to behave differently from the thief. Every society, in fact, expects from each particular status a particular way of behaving, a particular role.
Status and role. A man's status is the place he has at any given time on the ladder of his society. A man's role is the behavior his society expects from that particular status.
In other words, Shakespeare has told us all about it long ago.
All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts.
Wherever we go, we hear the phrases that show people are conscious of status.
They come from across the tracks.
She's one of the first families of Virginia.
Of course, they say he has royal blood in him.
Sure, he's a big shot. Look at his low license plate.
I'm afraid we can't give you a raise, but we can give you a desk nearer the window.
Listen to this. Reforestation praised by well-known movie actress. Gee, her.
It's the same all over the world. In New Guinea, among the Mundagamore.
He's an important man. He has 7 wives.
In New Zealand, among the Maori.
Very sacred person. Firstborn son of a chief.
In India, among the Hindus.
He is a very high caste man. Thrice born. A Brahmin.
Or among the Mohammedans.
See his red-dyed beard? He is a Haji. He has made the pilgrimage to Mecca.
Similarly, we hear all round us phrases that show that we are conscious of role, the part we ought to play.
Well, here's how I see it from where I sit.
Well, at least I can give you the woman's point of view.
Speaking as your lawyer, I feel I ought to say this.
Oh, it was nothing at all, really. Anyone could do the same. Any crack golfer at all.
The experts can say what they like, but I want to speak as a layman.
I'm sorry, Johnny. I just couldn't. But I am willing to be a sister to you.
One of the best public examples of a man's behavior, his role, changing with his status, was Admiral Darlan's attitude toward the French fleet. When he was just an admiral, he wanted to get the fleet to the Allies. When he was made Minister of Marine, he felt he ought to keep it in France. Here's what Winston Churchill says about it in his memoirs. One day, Darlan had said he would order the French fleet to United Nations harbors.
The next day, General Georges met him in the afternoon and asked him what had happened. Darlan replied that he had changed his mind. When asked why, he answered simply, "I am now Minister of Marine." This did not mean that he had changed his mind in order to become Minister of Marine, but that being Minister of Marine, he had a different point of view.
Admiral Darlan's status had changed, and with that came a change in role. As admiral, his role was to save the fleet. As Minister of Marine, It was to remain loyal to France. Darlan understood that every status requires its proper role. Status, then, is a man's part in society. Role is the way he is expected to play that part. Every society has its own way of defining status. But roughly speaking, there are two main kinds. First, the kind of status you are born to.
Like being a king or an eldest son, or being born in New Guinea with the umbilical cord wrapped round your neck, which gets you the high status of being an artist.
The other kind is the kind of status you earn through your own exertions.
Like being president of the United States, or becoming a doctor, or getting yourself $1 million, or learning to write symphonies.
We'll take this one at a time. First, the kind of status you're born to.
To be a nobleman or a commoner, a man or a woman, or to be a native citizen of some great nation. All these things a person has to be born to, and all of them may give him more or less status.
Here's an example of the status given by citizenship. Remember when the Apostle Paul was preaching in Jerusalem, he was taken prisoner by some of his enemies.
Away with such a fellow from the earth, for it is not fit that he should live.
And as they cried out and cast off their clothes and threw dust into the air, the chief captain commanded them,
"Bring him into the castle. There let him be examined by scourging, so that he might know wherefore we cry against him."
And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by,
"Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned?"
When the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying,
"Take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman."
Then the chief captain came and said unto him,
"Tell me, art thou a Roman?"
Yea,
"With a great sum I obtained this freedom."
but I was free-born.
Then straightway they departed from him, which should have examined him. And the chief captain also was afraid, after he knew that he was a Roman, and because he had bound him.
The chief captain had acquired the valuable status, in this case the freedom of a naturalized Roman citizen, with a great sum. But the Apostle Paul was a Roman citizen, free-born. And in ancient days, that gave a great deal of status.
Another example of status that you are born to, the great question of caste in India. Among the Hindus, there are 4 main castes, and outside them, there are the people with no caste, the so-called untouchables. If you are a Hindu, you are born into your caste, and there is absolutely no way of changing it.
Excuse me, not strictly true. We Hindus believe that a person cannot change his caste in this life, but if he has lived properly in this incarnation, he will be reborn next time into a higher caste.
What caste do you belong to?
There are 4 castes. Brahmana, the teachers; Kshatriya, the guardians; Vaishya, the feeders; and Shudra, the servants. There are also those Hindus who are born without caste, who are therefore known as untouchables.
And which are you?
I am myself a Brahmin. This is the highest caste.
Oh, then you are a sort of nobleman, a sort of aristocrat.
Not at all, no. I am only a very humble clerk, but I am very high caste. My employer is a very wealthy man, very rich and very important. But he is not so high caste as I am, not at all. So I must be careful while I am eating that he does not come along, for then my dinner will have been ceremonially polluted. Of course, I would not pollute his dinner, because I am higher caste. But then, of course, I would not get near him, because he is a very rich man and eats in very expensive places, where I would not go anyway.
Then caste among the Hindus gives you a special status, quite apart from what you do or what you earn.
Exactly. The Hindu law book of Manu says that though Brahmins occupy themselves in all sorts of mean occupations, they must be honored in every way, for each of them is a very great deity. So you see, caste is a very important thing for an Orthodox Hindu. It is above all the thing that he is born with and which nothing can take away from him. You may think of Hindu caste as giving a man a fixed status. We think of it, on the contrary, as marking what progress the man has made in his journey through successive reincarnations.
In our own society, status is not nowadays regulated by what a man is born to, though the doctrine of the divine right of kings is a Western one. But many of us regard the color of a man's skin as something which should help in fixing his status, and to this extent we, too, have set up a caste system in our society.
Yet another kind of status that we are born to is the status of sex. In different societies, men have a different status from women, sometimes higher, sometimes lower, sometimes only different. Listen to what the Chinese poet Fu Xuan said about women's status in China around 1700 years ago. And notice how the poem tells us of the role expected from the woman at that place and at that time.
How sad it is to be framed in woman's form. Nothing on earth is held so cheap. A boy that comes to a home drops to earth like a god that chooses to be born. His bold heart braves the four oceans, the wind and dust of 1,000 miles. No one is glad when a girl is born. By her the family sets no store. When she grows up, she hides in her room, afraid to look a man in the face. No one cries when she leaves her home, sudden as clouds when the rain stops. She bows her head and composes her face. Her teeth are pressed on her red lips. She bows and kneels countless times. She must humble herself even to the servants.
Though in Tibet, where there are more men than women, women have the higher status. And sometimes a woman will be the head of a household of several husbands.
Indeed, in our own society, some people think that the head of the household is nowadays the wife.
And age, like sex, is a basis for status. But it may mean different things in different places. In China, the high status went to old people. In China, people wanted to seem old, for much respect was paid to age.
Just as in our society, people want to seem young, for the future belongs to youth.
In old China, the word was always,
think of the grandparents.
In our society, the word is more often,
think of the children.
Some societies have combined the two. The Plains Indians of North America often gave status to both the very young and the very old. On the other hand, the Bathonga of Africa gave the very old and the very young as little status as possible. Elsewhere in Africa, the Zulus gave the status to the old. But on the other hand, the Akikuyu from Kenya gave the high status to the young and, in fact, make a great deal of the young men taking over from the old ones.
So status is often decided by age or the lack of it. And this is something you cannot really do much about. If you live long enough, you will either lose status or gain it, depending on what society you happen to be living in. And of course, every society prescribes the role, the appropriate behavior for every different age.
It's worth pointing out right now that high status is not necessarily entirely comfortable. For every status, there is an appropriate role, and the role appropriate to high status may not be a very comfortable one.
In our society, we've often heard of the loneliness of greatness, and a job that carries one of the highest statuses in the world, that of President of the United States, has a role so exacting that it's been called a man-killing job.
And in other societies, things may be even more uncomfortable. On the west coast of Africa, there lives a tribe which is governed by the great and mighty priest-king Kukulu. Nobody has higher status than this king, but in his society, the role expected from the king is so arduous that nobody has a more miserable time.
Why should he be comfortable? The great King Kukulu is responsible for the safety of our whole tribe.
You mean he is a commander-in-chief?
No, he regulates the storms and the state of the atmosphere.
How?
Just by sitting in his chair.
All the time?
Certainly all the time. If he lay down, no wind would arise and navigation would be stopped.
Does he sleep in his chair?
Of course. If he lay down, the wind would stop and all the boats would be in trouble.
What does his wife think of this?
The great king is not allowed to have a wife.
Then what if he wants to leave his house?
He is not allowed to leave his house.
So his advisors go to him?
He has no advisors. He lives alone in his house in a wood, and all the time he sits still in his chair. He is a very important man indeed.
With us, people don't have much status if they don't have television sets.